Everyone, welcome to the podcast. My name is Victoria English, head coach at Alcohol Free Lifestyle. Some of you know that I live in Colorado. There is a strong community of recovery in this area of the country. Lots of people who are sober curious. They're examining and changing their relationship with alcohol. And to accompany that effort, there's a strong community of professionals. Today, I'm interviewing a friend of mine, Belina Fruitman, who is out of Denver, but is presently making me very jealous because she's in California, looking at the ocean and lots of greenery while I'm looking at brown grass and clouds here in Colorado. So a little envious, but just so you know, she does work with individuals in Colorado and from around the country. I'll be sharing more of her information and how you can reach her later. Belina went to the University of Denver. She is a certified addiction specialist and a licensed clinical social worker. She has a goal to support her clients in their personal and professional life by integrating evidence-based tools and diverse materials while focusing on the client's inherent strengths. Her mindful approach is caring and non-judgmental and recognizes the importance of working through shame, depression, anxiety, trauma, and/or resentment in a supportive approach that is also practical. Thanks for being here, Belina. So nice to see you.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here. And thank you for all the work that you do also, because it takes our community coming together to support our clients. So thank you for everything that you do.
Indeed, indeed. Thanks for saying that, because it touches on what we were just discussing. If you have gone through Project 90 or Beyond 90 with me, you know that I am a big advocate of therapy. I have a therapist. I'm very open about that. And many of our listeners likely have therapists as well. When we have members going through Project 90, the way I explain it is, during this process of releasing alcohol and receiving this professional high-level coaching, there are so many light bulbs that go off. The example I shared earlier with Belina was, we work with high-level professionals who are leaders in their industry, their community, their family, and yet when they go to a social event and they have a club soda, they feel left out, they feel different, they feel less than. Things like that are tools to healing. And so as a coach, I may ask them, when do you remember first feeling that way? And usually they can connect it to a very old memory. I'm a coach, not a therapist. But those are the sorts of things that they can take to a therapist and untangle. So together, as Belina said, we work in sync to empower clients with all the tools possible. Belina, do you have something to say about that, about the symbiotic relationship between therapy and coaching?
Absolutely. I feel like the more resources our clients have, the more likely they'll be successful. So what I talk about is seeing recovery as a job, so that every day my clients are focused on something that's related to relapse prevention and holistic healing. So that may mean coaching one day and Project 90 and a support group of fellowship where they're meeting with other people in recovery. And then they're meeting with me as well, doing private therapy and digging deep into issues that I call root issues, that if they're not worked through and they're not patterns, will be repeated by you are struggling with addiction or substance use disorder or alcohol use disorder. Mm-hmm. And I work with all addictions. So we tend to talk the most about alcohol and drugs, but there are other addictions too that people are grappling with, like eating disorders, like gambling, shopping, online pornography. So unfortunately, there are many things people get addicted to for various reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yes. certainly Dopamine Nation was a very important book during
Yes,
my process of healing. And
thank you.
it is this, it's all about the wiring, the reward pathways, and trying to fill a void with something. And that can come in lots of different forms. So thank you. And I can share with our listeners personally that in the past, when I was really, I was trying to break this cycle. And if you're listening to this and you find yourself on that merry-go-round, you're able to stop for a period of time, but then you go back and it's even worse. And so you resolve to do it again. And maybe you are using some of these tools. I certainly had a therapist, but I didn't have the knowledge that I have now around the science of addiction. I didn't have the community that was a fit for me. And I can say from personal experience that when I pieced those things together, I shared with Belina that it felt like all the work I'd done in the years prior finally came together. It all clicked. And so if you're listening and you feel like stopping drinking is an exercise in futility, I just want to say that no effort is ever wasted. And so keep trying. I think today's information is going to really provide some great breakthroughs for you. Belina,
Definitely. There's always hope.
There's always hope. While we breathe, we hope. Belina, tell me a little bit about how you got into working with people dealing with addiction.
Yeah, thank you. I love answering that question. So what happened was I started graduate school at DU, like you mentioned, and I really knew that I wanted to work in some sort of healing fashion, but I really didn't know exactly what that would look like. I used to think it was more about advocacy, um, legislation, policy development, which is still critically important to me. But then what happened was during graduate school, I found an internship at a place called The Haven, which is still there, by the way. It's part of ARTS, Addiction Research Treatment Services. And I had a time when they taught me about biopsychosocial assessments. And it was a residential treatment facility for women only who were in dire emergency crisis need. Their next stop would be possibly jail because these were women who had years of addiction and then unfortunately ended up involved in legal issues. So I ended up at this residential program for women only and fell in love with these people, these women who all they needed was professional support, wraparound care, a community, fellowship. They needed, of course, a really good assessment and a treatment plan. And I realized this is so meaningful that my passion started at that time. And ever since then, I specialized in women and major mental illness because we found that trauma or clinical depression and or generalized anxiety disorder is so common and often some of the root issues behind substance use disorder that I thought this is it. So I specialized for the first 20 years in women and this what we call dual diagnosis or co-occurring disorders, the other terminology. So that's where I began. And since then, I had many women refer men, their partners, their sons, their fathers. So then I started learning more and more about men's issues. So now I'm actually working with both. But that's how it began a long time ago. So I've been doing this a while now. It's been over 25 years.
Wow. Well, clearly you are a lifelong learner and
Yes.
always growing. I love what you said about wraparound treatment. I also, how do I put this? When we begin to struggle or we realize that we are struggling with our drinking, there is so much shame. I know from my own experience that my drinking really began to be maladaptive after a major trauma in my life. I then was experiencing anxiety and depression. What I always say to our members, our clients, is that look, alcohol works for about 30 minutes. And so if you're having anxiety and depression, yes, it will give you that hit, that initial high, but it is pouring gasoline on a fire. And so again, if you're listening, I hope you'll recognize, and maybe if you hear my story, you'll have a seed of compassion for me. I hope you'll have that, just that tiny seed of compassion for yourself, because none of us choose to develop this maladaptive relationship with alcohol. And perhaps hearing this from Belina will help you the same way you probably feel compassion for the women she just described in her first center. So thank you for bringing that up, Belina. I appreciate it.
Of course. Well, as my clients hear me say at the office, is it does start with using alcohol in a way to cope with something that's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And what I say typically is it's not a sustainable way to live. So it might seem okay in the moment. You need a glass of wine in the evening to overwhelmed by all of your responsibilities. But it's not a sustainable way to live, because then you need 3 glasses of wine for the same effect. And then before you know it, you're drinking a bottle of wine by yourself at night. And then that's still not going to be enough at some point because of tolerance. So it's so important that in therapy, we do focus on some basic ideas like really solid coping skills that you can depend on when you're uncomfortable or overwhelmed or overly stressed or overly anxious or severely depressed. Because medications won't do that for you.
That's true. Yes, I tried medications as well. What's amazing to me, and you've known me for a while now, and I can say honestly, and I see this in our members, is that over time, your default coping mechanism can and will become the healthier choice.
Mm-hmm.
It seems impossible, and that's why I say it so often, but that's the power of this work, of this wraparound approach of neuroplasticity, of literally rewiring your brain. Whenever I go through a tough time, I've learned to tolerate the emotions. I've learned to observe them. I've learned the power of the pause. And regardless of how uncomfortable I become, I don't consider drinking to be an option. Mm-hmm. If it ever does come up in my mind as an option, because I'm not bulletproof, I'm not immune, I know what to do. I know where to go. I don't have stigma or shame around it. It's simply a function of how my brain learned to cope. And now, thankfully, I have other tools.
Absolutely. That was so well said, Victoria.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, Stephanie Covington, one of my favorite authors, she said it's important to feel connected to people who care about you and who won't judge you.
Can you repeat that? It broke up
I would
just
say
a little bit.
Stephanie Covington, who's a well-known author, she always says we recover in connection, not isolation, which is a critical component of recovery, that someone doesn't feel alone, because recovery alone is impossible. You can think that you're the strongest, toughest person and you can, what we say, white knuckle it, but it's not going to be effective long term. So we need a place where we can connect and not feel judged, so we can work through shame and secrecy and be transparent and be authentic, because that's where the change happens.
Thank you for that, Belina. Sometimes when we do meet with people on discovery calls, and by the way, as you all know, you can book a free 15-minute discovery call. Just like Belina was saying, alcohol wants you alone. It wants you isolated. It wants you coming up with your own solutions. It doesn't happen that way. You can be successful, powerful, strong-willed. Addiction is different. And I use addiction because alcohol use disorder is a very broad spectrum. And so when you think of that word, we're not talking about, we may be talking about someone who is drinking vodka first thing in the morning, but we're also talking about the people who just can't seem to stop and stay stopped. And so there's no stigma in being on that spectrum. And you do have the responsibility to do something about it with this awareness. I love how society is finally starting to change a little bit in that area. So what I was saying is, Belina, there are people that we speak with on our discovery calls, and sometimes they have just found us and they hear it and it resonates and they are booking that call, and a couple of days later they are in the program. I'm coaching them, James, Sarah, they're coaching them, and they are moving forward. Sometimes we'll speak with people who have been getting our emails for over 2 years, who have heard virtually every episode. We have over, I think, close to 400 episodes. They say I've listened to dozens and dozens and dozens. That brings us to the topic of stages of change. And I can't think of anyone better than you to talk about that, to talk about the stages of change and how we can move through them in an empowering way.
Okay, another great question. Thank you. So two authors named Prochaska and Di Clemente came up with this trans theoretical model, commonly known as the stages of change. And this was in the 1970s when they developed this model, and we can still use it today because it's really timeless. So what we find is when I do a thorough biopsychosocial assessment, I get a really good history on someone, I can ask the right questions to figure out where they're at in terms of change, either wanting to change or trying to change, or maybe not ready to change. So this model we can share on your website, and I have part of it on one of my websites at yourintervention.com. But essentially it starts with pre-contemplation, which is denial. So many people are stuck, as you said, the word stuck in denial, where they don't really see any real problem yet. They don't recognize that there's a problem. They think it's fine that, you know, they're drinking most evenings and that it's hard to stop at one, but they don't think it's problematic for whatever reason. It's oftentimes it's being reinforced by their peers, by their family. So they see it modeled around them. So there's still this denial of, I don't really need to work on anything. I'm okay. When people move out of that, they are typically in the next stage, which is pre-contemplation. And in that stage, that's when they're listening to the podcast and they're contemplating, well, maybe there's an opportunity for me to look at things differently. Maybe I do need to consider changing something. And it could be alcohol abuse, it could be substance abuse, it could be nutrition, it can be a variety of things, right? So they're contemplating, they're maybe starting to look around and question themselves and question people around them. Like, is this the best way for me to live? So that can be quite a stage, and that can be 6 months before they're even actively ready, full on in, which is the next stage, which is determination and preparation. And in this stage, the person they're really in. They're coming to therapy, they're setting appointments, and they are doing research. They're looking into what resources are available. They're talking to maybe other people who have made changes. and getting information from them and starting to connect with what's available to me, what can help me. They might be reading books about change and really open to that honest conversation of what's next. From there, people move into action. That's the next stage, which is usually around 6 months of actively living it. You are consistently in therapy. You're not canceling. You're consistently seeing a coach or going to groups or getting that wraparound service. So it's holistic care that's actually taking place. And they're fully engaged and authentic, transparent, and actively working what works for them. And remember, I tailor treatment to my clients. So I don't believe in a cookie cutter approach. So action looks different for a lot of people because we're all so unique. We have unique needs, we have a unique history. So action could look different to each person depending on what I call the recipe, because each person has a unique recipe for what helps them manage and change. So that's typically 6 months. Then the next stage is maintenance, where they are 6 months sober or they have 6 months of change, whatever they were working on changing, and they are not relapsing. They have engaged in what they needed, what their ultimate goal was. They have been living it, they're maintaining it, and it's so beautiful to see that transformation. And then from there, we talk about, okay, how do we maintain this? You've done all this work. You've seen radical change happen in your life. You're reaping the benefits of it. You're rebuilding trust with yourself and with people who love you and care about you. Let's keep on maintaining it. And what does that look like? How do you do that, right? How do you not get complacent? So these are some of the questions we're talking about. And then there's sort of another stage, but not really. I don't think of it as a stage, but it's relapse. And if that happens, because you said we're not bulletproof, you said that so well. I love that metaphor. So then what? What happens if you do relapse? We get back into the stages of change. So we don't have to start all over. It's not failure, right? It's let's learn from it. It's an opportunity to talk about lessons, which is another big topic I talk about with clients. Like there are lessons every day. Like we need to pay attention to those and learn from them. So that's a watered down summary, but I hope it's helpful.
It's great. You said that so concisely and so effectively. I have a few questions around some of the stages, and I agree. If you are listening to this podcast, you might be in the stage of contemplation. You're realizing that just because so and so drinks more than you doesn't mean that there isn't cause for you to take a look at change. And
That's right.
so if you're in that stage of contemplation, I know for me, I was listening to one of the very first podcasts that was ever out there called The Bubble Hour.
Oh, right.
Like the first podcast about being alcohol free, and it was mostly for women. And I would listen to it while I folded my laundry and drank wine.
Oh, okay, right.
But
That's
I
awesome.
was listening. I was really thinking about it in my head. And so, of course, I realize even more now that being in that contemplation stage for too long, in the preparation stage for too long, can be risky. I'm very lucky. Our members are lucky that nothing tragic happened during those times. There were certainly consequences, and I stayed in that puddle of muck for a long time. And in hindsight, I wish I'd gotten out of there sooner. Can you identify questions to ask yourself, or maybe some tools that if they're looking at the forecast with their drinking, it's starting to really scare them?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And you know what? Oftentimes it does take a crisis to motivate someone to change.
Mm-hmm.
It does. I see it every day. Sometimes somebody's contemplating for years.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do I need to change something? And I know we're focused on alcohol. So is it
Mm-hmm.
okay? Can I continue down this path?
Is
So
it
that's a big
sustainable?
question. But
Yeah.
if there isn't a crisis waking you up, like for instance, a DUI, which I offer private DUI programming. If it's a crisis like that, then sometimes it's such a wake up call. There's this alarm blaring that tells you you have no choice now. You have to change. But that doesn't happen to everyone. Not everyone has a crisis that wakes them up. So I feel like the questions I ask my clients who aren't facing an emergency situation where they don't have a choice is I have them write down 2 columns. I find writing very cathartic. So I often assign journal prompts to my clients when they're not with me so that they have a focus when we're not together. And the 2 columns are, what are the benefits of you changing that behavior, that maladaptive behavior? And then the other column is, what are the consequences of not changing? So this is a deep introspective exercise. And with that, we can then dissect it. So my clients and I will sit down and talk about everything they wrote down and dissect each one. How is that a benefit of change? How is it a consequence of not? And we really dig into it on a deep level. And it's a powerful tool. I've been using that for years. And with every client, there's something we can really address that can maybe help them move into preparation determination stage.
Mm-hmm. That's really great. What about, Belina? I know I'm kind of meandering here, but let's
Okay.
say that they
It's
let's say
not a
they make
linear process, right?
let's exactly. Let's say that I make a list of the benefits of change. Oh gosh, if I stopped drinking, I would be healthier. I'd have more energy. My skin would look better. I wouldn't embarrass myself. Things like that. And then I go over to the consequences of not changing.
Okay.
Well, I could fall and crack my head. I could embarrass myself at a work function and jeopardize my career. I could get behind the wheel and get at best a DUI, at worst hurt somebody else or hurt myself. Except what if they just seem what if it just seems like something that could happen, but that's not going to happen to me because I get an Uber and I don't drink at work functions all that much. I wait until I go home afterwards. I encounter a lot of people
Mhm.
like that, and I certainly was like that.
Sure.
Any tips on that, on breaking through?
Mhm. That kind of denial is a very natural defense mechanism. We have defense mechanisms for a reason. And sometimes we need to recognize that, okay, this is a defense mechanism. Like I would tell a client, can you see how that could be a defense mechanism? And then I would ask them, okay, what would it take? Tell me, what would it take for you to consider changing this behavior?
An invitation.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. That's what an amazing reframe.
Mm-hmm. Very important. Very important. And sometimes, a client will come to me and they've never talked to this point. They've never had anyone where they could really divulge the pain around this, because this is another aspect we didn't talk about yet, but a lot of times there's pain and suffering behind all of it.
Absolutely.
And the pain is so severe that they want to feel numb. They don't want to feel sober. Because when you get sober or you're alcohol free, you have to suddenly see things you didn't want to see, feel things you didn't want to feel. But it's important that my clients know this is a temporary feeling of pain. Like you can work through this, but it's not going to help you if you continue down the current route of substance use or even pharmaceutical abuse. Like how much Xanax can you take? How much trazodone and Ambien do you need at night to sleep? Like you need to learn how to work through these feelings, or else it's going to be a difficult, painful life ahead, which no one deserves that. We all deserve to live our best life. It's so short.
Yes. Nobody deserves that. No matter, I a big part of my coaching is empowering people to return to their authentic self and remember who they actually are. When you repeat this cycle of drinking enough times and you behave in ways that are not aligned with your character and your values, you will start to believe that that's who you actually are. And yes, the beginning is uncomfortable. If it were easy, everyone would do it when they realize they have an issue. They'd say, oh, you know what? The cost benefit analysis is not in my favor. I'm going to stop. It is uncomfortable and important words, temporary. It's temporary. There will be an end to it. And on the other side of it, you get to experience all the things that alcohol promised.
Right.
And I think that's critical, and another reminder that this is not meant to be done on your own. Alcohol is very convincing, very powerful. It's going to sing you its siren song. So
well, you know, it hijacks the brain. So it's a crippling situation, whether you believe in the disease model or not. It's a crippling, we'll call it disease for now. That's a whole nother conversation,
yes,
right?
Yes, it is. Choice.
But that's a whole nother podcast.
Yes.
That's okay, but we'll go with that for now, right?
Yes.
So it's crippling, it's hijacking, and there's hope. There's treatment, and treatment works. It does. I see it every day for over 25 years.
Yes.
But it works when the client is motivated to change and engage and be consistent. That's when it works.
Yes. Yes. That's one of the things we do in Project 90. We do have some requirements. If you are in this, you're going to show up and we're going to cheer you on and support you. And the motivation is so incredible, because as you return to your authentic self, I call it coming home to your best friend, maybe your best friend that you've never met.
Love that.
And
That's awesome.
It's exciting. It's exciting. Yeah. And that creates that momentum and perpetuates the progress and the healing. I had one more question about those stages.
Okay.
We have our 90-day program. In fact, that's what James had when I came on board. And then because of my own personal experience, I had stopped for 90 days. I thought, I'm fixed, I'm healed, I'll never drink again. Well, imagine my surprise when I did. Because complacency is a kind of a normal human thing. We get to a point and we say we're good. After being with James in this business for a while, we started Beyond 90, which takes individuals to at least 1 year alcohol-free. And now we just started last month a leadership program for people who are beyond 1 year. We have members who are 3 years alcohol-free and are still in our community because they love it.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so whether it's with Project 90, alcohol-free lifestyle, or something else, some other path to releasing alcohol, what are some tips you have in that maintenance, as they move from action into maintenance, so that they can, in a non-fearful way, not, oh my gosh, I'm terrified, I'll drink again, but more in an empowering way, they can embrace maintenance?
Well, I think ultimately the person needs to be really cognizant of all the benefits thus far. If someone can stay focused on what are the benefits, I have every client do this. Keep a journal of every benefit. Some days you might see more benefits than others, but if you can stay aware and cognizant of these were the benefits of that hard work, and I want to maintain that, then you might stay motivated. But you also need to stay connected to the whole concept of recovery.
This. So you said recovery is a lifelong, that's where I lost you. Stay connected.
Forever is a big word, and I know that it can be uncomfortable to even consider. So it's honest though, because with anything that needs fundamental change is something that needs to be lifelong. So just like people learn to manage anxiety disorders like eating disorders, or like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, these things don't disappear. We learn to manage them. And we learn to focus on what we have control over versus what we don't have control over. But if we are mindful about the benefits of change, then we are motivated to want to maintain those benefits and continue adding on to the benefits because they're endless. So I think it's important that people continue keeping track of all the positive change that happens with their hard work so that they don't regress and they don't go back to an old way of living.
Agreed. I like that context. We refer to beyond 90 and then beyond 90 as a get to. When they come into, when our members join us, there is a sense of, I have to do something about my drinking now. The rest of it, and this is my experience in my life now, is I get to right. Support my healing journey on all levels. I get to live a life where I can experience right. true joy, and I can tolerate sadness and anger and all the things I used to drink over. The same way that I live a certain lifestyle as a breast cancer survivor. It's not that I have to. I get to support my body and optimize my health so that hopefully this stuff never comes back. And I look at living an alcohol-free life the same way. And you're right, the mindset, the staying motivated to see what else is out there. What else can I do with my life?
Right. And I like the way you framed it. I get to. You said I get to. Another way to look at this is I need to. Like being in touch with what do you really need? That's another question, right? You asked about questions earlier. What do I really need to feel healthy and grounded and clear and strong and so forth? So that's another way to question ourselves.
I like that. Yes. I'll talk about, we never need a drink. We need right. something. We have needs, the hierarchy right. of needs. We need things. We don't need alcohol. And that's one of the most liberating statements in my life. I don't need alcohol. Yeah. And it's always a joy, I'm sure for you as well, when we can empower and assist people in getting to that point. Well, yes. Thank you. That's so helpful. One more quick question off the cuff. Where do you see the direction of the Sober Curious movement heading?
Which movement?
The Sober Curious movement.
Where do I see it moving? Well, I love that. That's a great question. That's a very good question. I see it moving away from pharmaceuticals, like things like MAT, medicated assisted therapy, like naltrexone, like Antabuse. I see it moving away from there and more towards possibly what we're calling now natural medicines, possibly psilocybin use, which I have been exploring, and I'm beginning training in that direction because I have always said the more tools we have at our disposal, the better, right? So if it doesn't have adverse side effects and it's not addictive, it could be worth looking at, right? And exploring, like many of us are doing in my industry. So I see that as one avenue. The other avenue is I think there's more and more acceptance around sober living. And I'm seeing that in restaurants. Yay. That they have mocktail menus now. What restaurant doesn't have a mocktail menu these days? Like they're so out of the loop if they don't. So I see that as very positive. So I think we're moving in the right direction. I really want to believe that. A lot of big changes still needed out there because there's also a segment that I don't like where retailers, marketers are pushing this women in wine culture, which I don't like. And every time I go shopping for a friend's gift at these gift shops, there's always a whole section on women in wine, and there's aprons and napkins and dish towels and the glass that holds one whole bottle of wine. That is very offensive. So we need to get away from that direction and move into the other directions that I just listed because I'm really optimistic.
That's awesome. I agree. I agree. There is less stigma around it. I also find, and this is a big part of our mission, is you don't have to have your typical hideous rock bottom to change your relationship with alcohol, to take a
That's
look
right.
at it. The same way that if you got to a certain age and you couldn't tolerate dairy, it wouldn't be it's not a big deal. It doesn't agree with you anymore. That's my favorite
Exactly.
comment when someone says to one of our members, "Why aren't you drinking?" It doesn't agree with me. And that's enough. The mommy wine culture, you and I could go on and on and on and on and on. That is my passion.
Maybe
Um,
we'll talk about that next time.
I think we need to do a series,
Okay, let's
Belina.
do that.
This is fantastic. So yes, I I know our listeners have enjoyed this. You'll be hearing from Belina again. She's a force and
Thank
a
you.
truly compassionate, intelligent woman. And so thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having
Remember,
me.
you'll have some show notes to find Belina and to check out that Stages of Change pie chart. Where are you? I'd love to hear from you. You can contact me on Instagram at Victoria English 1111. And until next time, take good care. Have an awesome day.